Amelia looked up, her face pale, bracing herself for the stranger's judgment. She had laid bare her darkest moments, and now, this faceless person held the power to ruin her, or perhaps, offer her a second chance. But the stranger only stared, their silence pressing down on her like a weight. Finally, they leaned forward, their voice low and cold. "Do you even remember his name, Amelia?" The question struck her like a slap. She hadn't let herself remember, hadn't allowed herself to think of him as anything but a haunting memory. The truth was, she had never wanted to know. She had buried it all so deeply, hoping she could escape the shame. Her silence was answer enough. The stranger shook their head in disgust. His name was Ben. He was 21. He had dreams, people who loved him. And you stole that from him, Amelia. You left him there like he didn't matter. Hearing the name broke something inside her. Ben. She repeated it in her mind, a weight settling in her chest. Suddenly, he wasn't just a memory or a mistake, he was a person with a life and family. Tears welled in her eyes, guilt overwhelming her. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, barely able to find her voice. "It was a mistake. I didn't know what to do." The stranger laughed bitterly, their voice echoing in the empty warehouse. "A mistake. You had choices, Amelia. You chose to run. And now you're going to face the consequences." Amelia wiped a tear from her cheek, her hands trembling. "So, what happens now? You're just going to ruin my life? Expose me to everyone?" The stranger stepped back, studying her, and for a moment, their expression softened. But just as quickly, the cold, steely mask returned. "Maybe. But I want you to understand something first." They reached into their pockets, pulling out a worn piece of paper, folded and creased from years of handling. Carefully, they unfolded it and held it out to her. Amelia hesitated, then took it, her eyes scanning the words written in a shaky, youthful script. It was a letter, one written by Ben himself. "Dear Mom and Dad. If something happens to me, I want you to know that I love you. You've always been there for me, and I'm grateful. If I don't make it back, please don't be sad. Just know I was doing what I believed was right." Amelia's vision blurred as she read. Her heart sank as she realized this wasn't just some stranger with a vendetta, this was someone who had loved Ben, someone who had known him deeply and felt the pain of his loss. She looked up, a question forming on her lips, but before she could speak, the stranger pulled down their hood. A young woman's face appeared beneath, her eyes red and filled with hatred and grief. "My name is Rachel," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm his sister. And I've spent the last 2 years trying to find you. Trying to bring you to justice." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. Ben's sister. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, suffocating her. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Rachel took a shaky breath, wiping away a tear. "I loved him, Amelia. He was my brother, my best friend. And you took him away." Amelia's world tilted, her guilt a vice around her heart. She opened her mouth, trying to find the right words, some way to make it right, but she knew it would never be enough. Amelia's voice was barely a whisper. "Rachel. I'm sorry. I can't undo what I did, but I'll do anything to make this right." Rachel's expression hardened, her fist clenched. "There's nothing you can do to bring him back. Sorry won't change what happened, and it won't erase the years my family has spent in agony, wondering why his life was cut short." Amelia felt herself breaking. She wanted to turn back time, to make a different choice that night, but the reality was staring her in the face, and there was no escape. "You're right. I deserve whatever you're going to do," she said quietly, resigning herself to whatever fate Rachel had planned. Rachel seemed to hesitate, as if torn between the desire for revenge and the weight of her own grief. She walked over to a stack of crates nearby and sat down, covering her face with her hands. For a moment, she was silent, and the only sound in the warehouse was the faint hum of the city beyond. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "My parents think he died in an accident. They don't know the truth. They don't know that you left him there." Amelia felt her heart crack open at the pain in Rachel's words. "Please," she whispered, "let me explain it to them. Let me face them myself." Rachel looked up sharply, anger flashing in her eyes. "You think facing them will bring peace? Do you think anything you say could lessen what they've been through?" Amelia dropped her gaze, feeling the full weight of Rachel's fury. She didn't know what she'd hoped for, but she realized now that Rachel didn't want her apologies. She wanted her to feel every ounce of pain she'd caused. Rachel stood and walked toward the door, her shoulders tense, as if wrestling with a decision. She paused, glancing back at Amelia with an expression torn between disgust and pity. "Maybe you're right," she said coldly. "Maybe you should tell them. But it won't change anything." Amelia rose, her voice shaking. "Then, what will?" Rachel was silent for a long moment, then she turned, her expression hardening. "I don't want you to just confess. I want you to carry the weight of what you've done every single day. To live with it. No shortcuts, no relief. That's your punishment." Amelia felt a chill down her spine. She understood what Rachel was saying. This wouldn't end with a confrontation or a simple apology. Her punishment was a lifetime of guilt, a sentence she couldn't escape. Rachel took one last look at her, eyes filled with sorrow and anger. "Go to them, Amelia. And tell them everything. Then live with the consequences." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Amelia alone in the warehouse, surrounded by shadows. The door closed behind Rachel, and the silence was absolute, the weight of her words pressing down on Amelia like a final judgment. She sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face as the reality set in. She would have to face Ben's family, to see the heartbreak in their eyes as she confessed to the truth. She would have to live with their pain, knowing she was the cause. And for the first time in years, Amelia felt the true cost of her actions.